What do you tend to see folks distract themselves with instead of confronting their grief?
Oh, well, this kind of depends on where in the world you're located, but I know at least for westernized clients that I work with, it's a lot of food and alcohol because those are acceptable right now in our society. Also, fantasy, i.e., escaping to things like Netflix or to binge reading books or to kind of just like how do I tune out of the world that I'm living in and into something totally separate. Food and alcohol are really accepted, and then fantasy is as well in our society. But you can also see that come out through drugs, through substances, like you were mentioning, but also through things like shopping or buying a lot of things at once, stress shopping, because it's like, well, I control my money, so maybe I can have all of these things. So materialism comes up sometimes. Also, sleeping a lot or not sleeping at all. And then the last one I'll point out that feels a little bit more rare, but you kind of saw coming up when COVID first hit, is recklessness. So because the streets were clear and people were stressed out, people were driving at like, I don't know, 80, 90 miles an hour, 95 on the interstate when the speed limit's 60, but because it's like, I'm stressed, there's no one else here. A, I kind of am an a-hole, but B, there's something about like, I want to be alive. So sometimes if you see people doing a lot of risky things or reckless things all at once, like I'm going to go skydiving, then I'm going to get a tattoo, and then I'm going to move across country, and then whatever. I'm like, what's happening in your world that is not being processed? And that's not to say that you can't go skydiving or get a tattoo or move across the country, but especially when it happens back to back to back without a lot of intention or reflection, could be a symbol of there's some grief in here that's not being addressed.
I love that you're bringing those things up. I actually had a I want to get a tattoo moment in the
Oh, I wanted to cut all my
pandemic.
hair off.
Yeah, there's so many things. It's hilarious. And I've also had those moments in my career where moving across the country was the next step. And I look at some of the moments in my career, whether it was me quitting or whether it was getting laid off, and the dominoes that happened afterward are really interesting to look back on, right? I remember I was in a job once and I really wanted to get out, and I decided, I'm going to quit by this date. And once I made that decision, it created this domino of like, all right, I'm also going to get out of this relationship. I'm going to move out of this apartment. I'm going to go on a road trip with a buddy of mine, and like that cascade. It was an interesting period of growth in my life, but it was also like that could probably have been done in stages. It maybe didn't all have to happen at the same moment, but I do find that it's like, all right, well, if I'm going to control it, I'm going to control all of it, or if I'm going to avoid it, I'm going to
Mhm.
avoid all of it. And that is such an interesting all or nothing approach. Do you see a lot of all or nothing thinking in the folks that you work with?
Oh, yeah. And well, and I'm guilty of this as well, and I call it psychological extremism. In my work, I'm like, and then I read it like to myself when I work with myself, or sometimes when I work with clients, we'll joke and read it in like a monster truck voice, like extreme anxiety. And it's just like the ways in which it shows up. And so there's these stories of, um, if I get fired from this job, I'll never get another job again. So never and always are indicators.
Mm.
Or I always have to start at the bottom from a company. I can never come in mid-level or high level. And so these stories that people tell about themselves, but it's like, oh, I never blah, blah, blah. And so you read it in like monster truck voice, and it's like extreme stories. Because so much of the work that I do in grief is not necessarily helping people pull emotions out of themselves. That's part of it. But a larger part of the work I do is, as author Lori Gottlieb says, to help edit the stories that people tell themselves in their brains. And so I'm like, how is this story of I always start at the bottom and I can never come in at mid-level or higher level? How is that serving you right now? And for a lot of times, especially in jobs, it's keeping them stuck. It's reinforcing a victim story. It could be telling something that's very true, especially if they're in a marginalized population or in a workforce that does not see a lot of people like them. And so it could be like, I am a person who's breaking barriers, and this is the price that I'm forced to pay because of how society is structured. But it could also be, how true is this? Are there other ways I can help myself? And so these are the questions that I ask in sessions that offer people, how can I have power here? Or how can I feel safer here? What within this job that I don't have control over can I access control over? And in that space, if I don't have control, can I help myself feel safer? But yeah, that extremism of the never and always, very common in grief and in job.